Imagine being treated like dirt. Insulted, humiliated, and accused of things you never did, just because you're poor. That's what this maid endured every single day inside a mansion where kindness had no place. But then, in one shocking moment, the millionaire's son walked in. And what he saw changed everything. His fury shook the house. His words silenced the room, and his decision will leave you speechless. The shrill voice of Margaret Whitmore tore through the stillness of the Whitmore estate like a thunderclap. Her words ricocheted off the chandeliered ceiling, bouncing across polished oak floors and velvet curtains until every corner of the grand mansion trembled with tension. You are worthless, Emily. Worthless. A complete embarrassment. Margaret roared, her diamond necklace rattling against her chest as her voice rose higher and higher on the Persian rug of the massive living room. Emily Carter, 26 years old, knelt with her head bowed low. Her hands, already trembling, tried to gather the scattered fragments of a shattered crystal vase. It had been one of Margaret's prized possessions, an antique imported from Europe, displayed on the glass pedestal table as though it were a symbol of her family's untouchable wealth. Emily's fingers shook as she reached for the razor-sharp edges. One shard sliced across her skin, leaving a thin red line that quickly blossomed into a stream of blood. She winced but didn't stop. She couldn't, not when her entire livelihood and her grandmother's medicine depended on this job. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore," Emily whispered, her voice breaking like fragile glass itself. "It was an accident. Please forgive me." Margaret, 58, with her perfectly curled blonde hair and meticulously painted lips, paced around Emily like a wolf circling prey. Every step of her dark navy heels clicked against the marble, each sound more threatening than the last. "Forgive you? For destroying something worth $5,000? She hissed. "Girls like you don't deserve forgiveness. You don't even deserve to be in a house like this. You come from nothing, and nothing is what you'll always be." Emily's breathing grew shallow, but she kept her eyes on the floor, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "I'll pay for it," Emily stammered, her voice barely audible. "You can take it from my salary." Margaret threw back her head and laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "Your salary? Do you think what you make in a month could even buy one corner of this vase? You are pathetic. People like you. You're nothing more than the dirt on my shoes." From the doorway, Cleo the cook, who had worked for the family nearly 20 years, watched with wide eyes. She silently shook her head at Emily, urging her not to respond, not to make things worse. But Emily, in her trembling desperation, had already spoken. The other maids pretended to busy themselves in distant hallways, terrified of becoming Margaret's next target. The air was heavy, thick with dread, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Margaret's fury built like a storm. She stepped closer, her perfume sharp in Emily's nostrils, and raised her hand high, ready to deliver a slap across the young woman's face. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. She shut her eyes tightly, bracing herself for the sting of the blow, her body tense as a coiled spring. But the strike never came. The heavy oak front door burst open, slamming against the wall with a crash that echoed through the house. The gust of autumn air that followed rattled the curtains and sent the broken shards of crystal skittering across the floor. A deep voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Mother, what is going on here?" Emily's eyes flew open. Standing in the doorway, his tall frame outlined against the late afternoon light, was Michael Whitmore, Margaret's only son. He had just returned from a 3-month trip through Europe, his suitcases still piled behind him in the entryway. His sharp brown eyes swept the scene in front of him, his mother with her arms suspended mid-air, her face twisted with rage. A young maid kneeling on the floor, her hands bleeding, her cheeks wet with tears. For a moment, Michael was frozen, his breath caught in his throat at the shocking sight. Margaret's hand dropped immediately, her fury replaced with a brittle false smile. "Michael, darling." What a surprise. I didn't know you were coming home today." Michael ignored her words. His stride was purposeful as he crossed the room and crouched beside Emily. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, steady, but filled with concern. His gaze fell on her wounded hands, the crimson streak standing out against her pale skin. "You're hurt." Emily hesitated, overwhelmed by his sudden closeness, by the way he looked directly at her, as though she were not invisible, not just the hired help. "I'm fine, sir," she whispered, though her hands trembled, betraying her pain. For the first time in his 35 years, Michael Whitmore truly saw one of the servants his family employed, not as background, not as shadows in the halls, but as a human being, fragile and bleeding on his mother's rug. And something inside him shifted. Michael's arrival had frozen the air. For a long moment, no one in the grand living room dared to breathe. Margaret lowered her hand quickly, adjusting the expensive bracelet on her wrist as if she had never meant to strike. But the color on her cheeks betrayed her rage. "Michael," she said, her voice honeyed now, forced into civility. "What a lovely surprise. You didn't tell me you'd be arriving today." "I didn't think I needed to," Michael replied, his tone clipped. He kept his gaze on Emily, still kneeling on the rug with blood trickling from her hands. Her green eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her shoulders trembling under the weight of humiliation. Michael reached out, offering his hand. Emily hesitated, her heart pounding, but finally allowed him to help her rise. The warmth of his grip startled her, gentle, protective, nothing like the cruelty she had just endured. "You're hurt," he repeated softly, his brows furrowed. "We need to clean these cuts." Emily quickly shook her head, flustered. "No, sir. I can manage." "It's nothing." "Nothing?" Michael's voice rose ever so slightly, just enough to carry across the room. He turned to his mother, his expression hardening. "She's bleeding, Mother." "And you were about to hit her." Margaret laughed nervously, waving her hand as though dismissing the accusation. "Oh, darling, don't exaggerate. It was only a misunderstanding. This girl broke an irreplaceable vase from my German collection, and I lost my temper. That's all." Michael's jaw tightened. "A misunderstanding?" She's cut and trembling on the floor. "That's not a misunderstanding, Mother. That's cruelty." Emily's eyes widened at his words. No one had ever defended her like that, certainly not in this house. For months she had endured Margaret's sharp tongue, the endless criticism, the disdain. And now, in front of everyone, the son of the family was standing between her and her tormentor. Margaret's smile faltered. She glanced nervously toward the corners of the room, where the other maids lingered in shadows, their heads bowed. They were watching, though pretending not to. Her authority, her iron grip over the household, was being questioned. "Michael," she said, her voice sharp now. "You've just come home. You don't understand how things are managed here." "I understand enough," he shot back. "I walked into this house and found a young woman bleeding on the carpet while you towered over her like—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "This isn't management. This is abuse." Emily's breath caught. Abuse. The word echoed inside her, like a truth she had tried not to name. Margaret's face reddened, her composure slipping. "How dare you speak to me like that?" "I am your mother." "And I am your son," Michael replied, his voice steady but firm. "Which is why I can't ignore what I just saw. You taught me to value integrity, didn't you? To treat people with respect? Or does that only apply to people of our own social class?" The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Emily stood frozen, caught between gratitude and fear. She wanted to thank him, to tell him how much his words meant, but another part of her warned that speaking up might only make Margaret's wrath burn hotter later. Michael turned back to Emily, softening his voice. "Come, let's take care of those cuts." Her instinct was to refuse. "No, sir, please. I don't want to cause any more trouble." He shook his head, almost smiling at the stubbornness in her tone. You're not causing trouble. You've had more than enough of that already. Let me help." Without waiting for permission, Michael guided her gently toward the wide doorway that led to the kitchen. Emily's heart raced as they crossed the long hall. The portraits of Whitmore ancestors stared down at her from gilded frames, their painted eyes seeming to judge her every step. Inside the kitchen, the world felt quieter, warmer. The scent of fresh bread still lingered from the morning, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Michael pulled out a chair and motioned for her to sit. "Give me your hand," he said. Emily hesitated. Her palms were trembling, smeared with blood. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not with authority softened by concern. She extended her hand slowly. Michael took it carefully, his fingers brushing against hers. He ran cool water over the cuts, watching the red swirl down the drain. Emily flinched at the sting, but his touch steadied her. "Does it hurt much?" he asked quietly. "A little," she admitted. He dried her hands gently with a clean towel and reached for the first aid kit. As he dabbed ointment onto the cuts, his eyes studied her face. Even beneath the plain maid's uniform and the loose strands of hair escaping her bun, there was a quiet dignity in her features, a strength that no cruelty could erase. "How long have you been working here?" he asked. 3 months, she said, her voice soft. He thought for a moment. "That was right after I left for Europe." "Yes, sir. Mrs. Whitmore hired me then." Michael applied bandages with surprising care, his hands steady, his expression focused. "And besides working here?" Emily hesitated. Should she tell him? Could she trust him? But something in his eyes, earnest, unpretentious, invited honesty. "I study at night," she admitted at last. "Pedagogy. I want to be a teacher." Michael's face lit with surprise. "A teacher? That's wonderful. Do you like it?" Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "Very much. I've always dreamed of working with children." Michael nodded, admiration flickering across his features. "I can see it. You'd be a wonderful teacher. You have kindness, patience, the things that matter most." For Emily, it was the first kind word she had heard in weeks. Warmth rose in her chest, battling the cold weight of Margaret's insults. "Thank you," she whispered. At that moment, the kitchen door creaked open. The sharp sound of heels against tile made Emily stiffen instantly. Margaret stood in the doorway, her face red, her eyes blazing. "Michael Robert Whitmore," she thundered, her voice shaking the walls. Both Emily and Michael turned, startled by the ferocity in her tone. "I was just—" Michael began. "I know exactly what you were doing," Margaret snapped. "You were sitting in my kitchen, tending to the maid like she's your equal." Emily tried to rise, but Margaret's glare pinned her in place. "Stay right there, girl. I want you to hear every word." "Mother, that's enough," Michael said firmly. "No, it isn't," Margaret shot back, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You don't know girls like her, Michael. They're all the same, scheming, manipulative, looking for rich men to rescue them." "That's not true," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. But her eyes lifted, steady and brave despite her fear. Margaret's gaze burned into her. "I know your type. I knew one just like you when I was young. My father threw away his fortune on a maid who tricked him. I lost everything because of women like you." Michael stared at his mother, stunned. "You never told me that." "It doesn't matter," Margaret hissed. "What matters is that I won't let history repeat itself. If I see even the slightest sign of you trying to entrap my son, you'll learn what real humiliation is." Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to defend herself, to cry out that she wasn't like that, but she forced herself to remain silent. Michael, however, could no longer stay quiet. "Mother, you're wrong. She's not like that. She's honest, hardworking. She's nothing." Margaret cut him off. "Nothing but trouble." Emily stood quickly, her voice trembling but clear. "Mrs. Whitmore, I respect your son, but I know my place." I would never cross that line. Her words pierced Michael's chest like a knife. I know my place. He hated hearing them, hated the way her dignity had been crushed into submission. Margaret smirked, satisfied. Good, remember that. With one last withering glance, she turned on her heel and stormed out, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. The kitchen was silent once again, broken only by Emily's unsteady breathing. Michael looked at her, his chest tight with anger and something else he couldn't yet name. A strange, unshakable desire to protect her. "Emily," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she forced a small, polite smile. "You don't need to apologize, sir. Your mother is right about one thing. We come from very different worlds." And with that, she slipped from the kitchen, leaving Michael staring after her, his heart heavier than it had been in years, yet burning with a resolve he could not explain. The following morning, sunlight filtered gently through the tall French windows of the Whitmore estate, painting golden streaks across the polished wood floors. But the beauty of the day did not reach Emily Carter. She moved silently through the house like a shadow, her head lowered, her hands still wrapped in the fresh bandages Michael had carefully applied the night before. Every corner of the estate seemed to hold Margaret's disapproving eyes. Even when she wasn't there. Emily had lived with insults before. She had scrubbed floors where her hard work went unnoticed, cooked meals for families who never learned her name, endured endless commands from employers who saw her as disposable. But never had she felt such a heavy cloud of hatred pressing down on her as she did under Margaret Whitmore's roof. And yet despite the humiliation, despite the sting of cruel words, Emily could not leave. Her grandmother's medicine was expensive, the bills constant. Every paycheck Emily earned meant the difference between security and fear. So she swallowed her pride, kept her chin down, and pressed on. That morning, as she polished the silverware in the dining room, she heard footsteps echoing behind her. She froze. For a heartbeat, she feared it was Margaret again, ready to unleash more venom. But when she turned, her breath caught. It was Michael Whitmore. He stood at the doorway, dressed in a tailored gray suit, his hair still slightly tousled as though he hadn't slept much. But his eyes, those piercing brown eyes, were steady, locked on her. "Good morning," he said, his tone soft but firm, as though he wanted to remind her she was more than invisible staff. Emily quickly lowered her gaze. "Good morning, sir." Michael stepped into the room, his shoes clicking against the marble, but his movements deliberate, calm. "How are your hands?" "They're fine," Emily answered quickly, almost too quickly. He tilted his head, unconvinced. "Are you telling me the truth, or are you saying what you think I want to hear?" Emily's cheeks flushed. "I wouldn't want to worry you, sir. It's not important." "It's important to me," Michael said firmly, leaning slightly closer. "You are important to me." The word struck Emily like a shock. She nearly dropped the silver tray in her hands. Important to him? Surely he didn't mean it the way her racing heart wanted to believe. She forced herself to speak evenly. "I appreciate your concern, but I don't deserve it." "I'm just what?" Michael interrupted, his voice sharper now. "Just a maid?" "Don't ever say that again." Emily swallowed hard. "But it's true. We live in different worlds. Your mother reminded me of that." Michael's jaw tightened. "My mother sees the world in terms of status, appearances, money. But I don't. I see a young woman standing here who works harder than anyone I've ever met, who studies at night, takes care of her grandmother, and still shows more grace and dignity than most people in this house. That's what I see." Emily's throat tightened, her eyes stinging with tears she fought to hold back. No one, not a teacher, not an employer, not even a friend, had ever spoken of her with such respect. Before she could respond, a voice pierced the air like a dagger. "Michael." They both turned. At the far end of the hall, Margaret Whitmore stood, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her gaze cold as winter. "I need a word with you." Alone. Michael's brows furrowed, but he nodded. He turned back to Emily, his eyes softening. Please, take care of yourself. We'll talk later. Emily bowed her head, murmuring a quiet, "Yes, sir," before slipping away into the servants' corridor. The moment she disappeared, Margaret's heels clicked sharply against the floor as she strode toward her son. "Michael, we need to put an end to this right now." "Put an end to what?" Michael asked evenly. "To whatever nonsense you're entertaining with that girl." Margaret's voice dripped with disdain. "I see the way you look at her. Don't you dare deny it." Michael's lips pressed into a hard line. "And if I do look at her differently? What then?" Margaret's eyes widened, her face flushing. "Then you are a fool. Don't you understand? Girls like her are dangerous. They pretend to be sweet, innocent, helpless, but they're waiting for the right moment to sink their claws into wealthy men. Into you, and once they do, they'll ruin everything." Michael's voice rose, sharp as steel. "That is not who she is." Margaret stepped closer, her fingers stabbing the air between them. "You think you know her? You don't know anything. I've seen it before. When I was young, my own father was fooled by a maid. She ruined our family, stripped us of dignity. I will not let history repeat itself in this house." Michael stared at his mother, stunned. "So this is about your past? About something that happened 40 years ago? And now you're punishing Emily for it?" Margaret's lips trembled, but her rage held firm. "I am protecting you. From what?" Michael snapped. "From kindness? From honesty? From someone who works herself to the bone just to survive? Tell me, Mother, what exactly has Emily done wrong?" Margaret faltered, caught off guard by the intensity of his words. But pride forced her chin higher. "She exists in our world when she doesn't belong here. That is wrong enough." Michael's chest tightened, fury burning through him. "No, Mother. The only thing wrong here is how you're treating her." For the first time, Margaret looked uncertain. She opened her mouth to argue again, but Michael turned away sharply, his footsteps echoing down the hall as he left her standing in silence. Later that afternoon, Emily sought refuge in the small garden behind the estate. The autumn air was cool, the leaves crisp underfoot. She sat on a wooden bench, her head bowed, her thoughts tangled. She had tried so hard to stay invisible, to keep her place, and yet somehow she had become the center of a storm. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. "Why me?" she whispered to herself. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching until Michael's voice broke the quiet. "Emily." She quickly wiped her face and stood, forcing a weak smile. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry, I was just crying," he finished gently. "Don't hide it from me." "I saw." Emily shook her head. "It's nothing. Just tiredness. Work, studies, my grandmother. Sometimes it all feels too heavy." Michael stepped closer, his voice low, earnest. "Then let me carry some of that weight with you." Her heart skipped. "You can't. This is my burden, not yours." "Maybe," he admitted. "But I want to help. You don't deserve to feel invisible. Not here. Not anywhere." Emily's lips parted, but words failed her. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the rustling leaves above them the only sound. And in that silence, something passed between them, something unspoken, fragile yet undeniable. Michael had crossed a line he had never dared before. And Emily, though terrified, felt a warmth in her chest she had never known. But in the shadows of the mansion windows, Margaret Whitmore watched with narrowed eyes. Her lips pressed into a thin line as fury coiled within her chest. "This ends now," she whispered to herself. And somewhere deep inside, Emily sensed it too. The storm had only begun. The storm inside the Whitmore estate grew heavier with every passing day. Margaret's pride had been wounded the moment she caught her son tending to Emily in the kitchen. And though she wore her usual pearls and painted smile at the charity luncheons and country club teas, Inside her mind, a dark plan was already forming. For Emily, the days became unbearable. At dawn, she would descend the attic stairs where her small room was tucked away, a room no larger than a storage closet, furnished with a narrow bed, a rickety dresser, and a small desk piled high with her college books. She would slip quietly through the house, polishing brass fixtures, scrubbing floors until her knuckles ached, dusting shelves that Margaret would later smear her fingers across just to prove her wrong. If Emily arranged the books in the library alphabetically, Margaret would sneak in afterward and shuffle them out of order, then call her back to scold her in front of the others. If Emily polished the silver until it gleamed like mirrors, Margaret would complain the shine was too dull and force her to start again. Even the other staff, once kind and friendly, began to distance themselves. Margaret's whispers had spread like poison. Emily is dangerous. Emily is after Michael. Emily will bring you down with her. The servants, fearful of losing their livelihoods, began to look away when Emily asked for help. Cleo, the cook who once offered her warm rolls fresh from the oven, now shook her head with a sad expression. "I can't, Emily. Please don't ask." Marta, the laundress, refused to answer her questions about misplaced linens. Emily found herself utterly alone, isolated in a house full of people. One evening, after a long day of polishing and repolishing the silverware, Emily escaped to the back garden. The moonlight stretched across the hedges, turning the world pale and soft. She sank onto the garden bench, burying her face in her hands. Tears leaked silently between her fingers. She didn't hear Michael until he was standing in front of her. "Emily," his voice was low, concerned. "What's wrong?" She wiped her cheeks quickly, forcing a brittle smile. "Nothing, sir. Just tired." Michael's eyes softened. He crouched before her, his gaze searching. "Don't lie to me. I can see it in your face. You've been crying." Her lips trembled. For a moment, she wanted to keep the truth buried, to swallow the hurt and pretend everything was fine. But his eyes, steady, sincere, broke the dam. "It's just, sometimes I feel invisible," she whispered. "Like no matter how hard I work, no matter how much I give, it will never be enough. That I'll never matter to anyone." Michael's chest tightened. "You matter," he said firmly. "More than you know. Don't let my mother or anyone else convince you otherwise." Emily blinked, startled by the conviction in his voice. No one had ever told her she mattered. "Not like this." She tried to smile. "You're very kind, sir. But kindness won't change the way things are. I'm a maid. You're you. We belong in different worlds." Michael held her gaze, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Maybe I don't believe in those worlds anymore." Her heart thudded painfully. She opened her mouth to respond, but a sharp voice split the night. "Michael!" Both turned, startled. Margaret stood at the French doors of the mansion, her figure framed in golden light from the chandelier behind her. Her eyes glinted with fury, her voice dripping venom. "What are you doing out here with her?" she demanded. Michael straightened, his jaw tight. Talking. Margaret's laugh was bitter. "You call this talking? It looks like something else to me. Don't you see, Michael? She's already wrapping you around her little finger." Emily stood, her face pale. "Mrs. Whitmore, please, Silence." Margaret barked, silencing her with a single word. Then she turned back to Michael. "You don't know these girls. They're all the same. Manipulative, deceitful, waiting for a rich man to fall into their trap." Michael's voice was firm, steady. "She's nothing like that. You're blinded by her act," Margaret hissed. "Do you know what she'd do next? First, it's the tears. Then the sob stories about her poor grandmother, her late parents, her struggles. And once you pity her, once you feel protective, she sink her claws in deeper. That's how they work." Emily's stomach churned. Shame and fury battled inside her. "That's not true," she said softly, her voice trembling. Margaret spun on her, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare speak. I know your type. You think I don't remember? When I was 20, my own father was seduced by a maid who looked just like you. She destroyed our family. I lost everything because of women like you. And I will not let that happen to my son." Michael's fists clenched at his sides. "Mother, this isn't about the past. This is about Emily, right here, right now. And she has done nothing wrong. She exists in this house," Margaret spat. "That's wrong enough." Emily's tears spilled over. She wanted to scream that she had done nothing but work, study, and care for her grandmother. She wanted to tell them both that she had no interest in anyone's fortune. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she drew in a shaky breath and whispered, "Mrs. Whitmore, I respect your son, but you don't need to worry. I know my place." The words cut through Michael's chest like a blade. "I know my place." He hated the defeat in her voice, the way she had been forced to bow under his mother's cruelty. Margaret smirked triumphantly. "Good, then stay in it." With that, she turned and disappeared into the house, her heels echoing like gunshots down the hall. Emily sank back onto the bench, her face pale. Michael stared after his mother, anger coursing through his veins. Then he turned back to Emily, his voice rough but gentle. "Emily, I'm so sorry." She shook her head. "Don't apologize. She's right, we're from different worlds. It's better if I just keep my distance." Michael stepped closer, his chest tight, his heart racing. "Emily, don't say that. Don't let her decide your worth." Emily rose quickly, keeping her gaze on the ground. "Please, sir. Don't make this harder than it already is." And before he could stop her, she hurried back inside, leaving him alone in the garden, his fists clenched, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar desperation. For the first time in his life, Michael Whitmore realized something terrifying, something he could not ignore, that he was falling in love with the maid his mother despised. The days that followed were heavy with tension, like storm clouds waiting to break. Emily moved through the mansion with her head bowed lower than ever, determined to avoid Margaret's wrath. She kept her hands busy from dawn until late at night polishing, scrubbing, dusting, cooking, anything to make herself invisible. But invisibility was no longer possible. Margaret had marked her, and everyone in the household knew it. Every morning, Margaret found some new fault. If Emily cleaned the grand staircase until it shone, Margaret would drag a gloved hand across the railing and declare it filthy. If Emily arranged flowers in the drawing room, Margaret would sneer that they looked cheap. Once, Emily spent hours reorganizing the massive library alphabetically, only to return later and find the shelves in chaos again. "You call this order?" Margaret demanded before all the servants. "You can't even manage books. Pathetic." The cruelty was relentless. And worse, the other staff began to withdraw from Emily, frightened of being targeted themselves. Once, she asked Marta for help lifting a heavy trunk, but the laundress turned her back with a muttered excuse. Cleo, who once had offered her warm rolls in secret, avoided her gaze completely. Emily ate alone, worked alone, existed alone. The silence of the staff's rejection was as sharp as Margaret's insults. Michael noticed Dot from the moment he returned from Europe. His eyes had been drawn to Emily. At first it was pity. She was a fragile figure kneeling on the rug, bleeding from her hands. But now as he watched her, something deeper stirred. He saw the quiet grace in the way she dusted books as though each one mattered, the patience with which she watered the garden plants, whispering to them as if they were alive. He noticed how she pressed her lips together when she was hurt, refusing to complain. He noticed the shadows beneath her eyes, evidence of nights spent studying after endless days of labor. One afternoon, Michael crossed paths with Emily in the corridor. She carried a bucket so heavy her arms trembled. "Let me help," he offered, stepping forward. "No, sir," Emily said quickly, backing away. "I can manage." "Emily, you're shaking," he insisted. He reached for the bucket, but she pulled it closer to her chest. "I said I can manage," Michael frowned. "Why are you doing this? Why are you shutting me out?" Her green eyes lifted to his, wide and filled with something between fear and sadness. "Because it's safer that way. For both of us." Before he could respond, she hurried off down the hall, her shoes tapping like a heartbeat against the marble floor. Michael stood frozen, frustration and longing twisting in his chest. That night, during dinner, he confronted his mother. The Whitmores sat at their long mahogany table, the chandelier spilling golden light across fine china and crystal goblets. Margaret sipped her wine, her posture stiff, her pearls gleaming against her throat. "Mother," Michael began, his tone measured. "How is Emily adjusting?" Margaret nearly choked on her drink. "Emily?" she repeated with a scoff. "Why do you ask about her? She seems different, sad, tired." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense. Girls like her should be grateful for employment in a house like this. She's lucky to be here." Michael's jaw tightened. "You say girls like her, as though she's beneath us." Margaret set down her glass sharply. "Because she is." The words cracked across the table like a whip. For a moment, even Michael's father, sitting quietly at the head of the table, looked uneasy. Michael leaned forward, his voice low. "Mother, she's educated. She works harder than anyone I've ever seen." "She's not what you think." Margaret's lips curled. "Of course she's not. They never are until it's too late." Michael exhaled, pushing back from the table. "You don't know her." "I know her type," Margaret snapped. "And I know exactly what she's after." Michael stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "No, you don't." He left the dining room, his mother's eyes following him like daggers. 2 mornings later, Margaret put her plan into action. While the servants bustled about, she slipped into Emily's attic room. The space was small but neat, bed carefully made, books stacked in a tidy pile, a few simple clothes folded in the dresser. On the nightstand lay a photograph of Emily's grandmother, smiling warmly despite her wrinkled face. Margaret's eyes narrowed. She reached into her pocket and drew out a delicate bracelet of white gold. It was one of her lesser-used pieces, but valuable enough. With a satisfied smirk, she lifted Emily's pillow and tucked the bracelet deep inside the case, smoothing the fabric afterward. "Let's see how perfect she looks when the truth comes out," Margaret whispered to herself before leaving. At noon, she gathered the staff in the grand salon. "My bracelet is missing," she announced, her voice cold and sharp. "A very expensive one. I want every room searched starting with hers." All eyes turned to Emily, who had just entered carrying a tray of tea. She froze, the porcelain rattling against the silver. "Mrs. Whitmore, you think I don't think." "I know," Margaret snapped. "Search her room." The group climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, Margaret leading with theatrical gravity. Emily followed, pale as a ghost, her hands trembling. When they entered her room, Margaret went straight to the bed. With a dramatic flourish, she pulled the pillowcase free and shook it. The bracelet clattered to the floor. Gasps filled the small space. "There it is," Margaret declared triumphantly. "Hidden, as I expected." Emily's knees buckled. "No. No, I didn't, please. I swear I never touched it." Her voice cracked as tears streamed down her cheeks. "I would never steal." The other servants exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked at her with pity, others with suspicion. The seed of doubt had been planted. Margaret folded her arms, her expression cold as stone. "Save your tears. Thieves always cry when they're caught." At that moment, a voice thundered from the doorway. "What is going on here?" Michael stood there, his face pale with fury. His eyes fell on Emily, sobbing on the floor, then on the bracelet glittering at Margaret's feet. He bent swiftly to pick it up. "Explain this," he demanded. His gaze locked on his mother. "She hid it," Margaret said calmly, almost smugly. "We searched. And there it was. The evidence speaks for itself. Michael studied the bracelet, then looked at Emily. The anguish in her eyes pierced him. She shook her head desperately. "I swear, Mr. Whitmore, I didn't do it. I swear on my grandmother's life." Michael's gut told him she was telling the truth. And then he noticed something. The bracelet was too new, the clasp shining, unscratched. He frowned. "When did you last wear this, Mother?" Margaret hesitated. "Why does it matter? When?" He pressed. She faltered, her cheeks coloring. I don't remember. Some weeks ago." Michael's eyes narrowed. "That's odd, because the receipt I found in your vanity says you bought it last week." The room fell silent. Margaret stiffened. "That's ridiculous." Michael held the bracelet higher. "So how does a brand new bracelet you bought last week end up under Emily's pillow?" "Explain that." Emily gasped, hope flickering in her tear-streaked face. Margaret stammered, caught. I put it there. It was a test. To see if she was honest." Michael's voice roared. "A test? You planted evidence to ruin her. Do you realize what you've done?" Emily broke then, sobbing openly, her whole body trembling. Why do you hate me so much? I've never done anything but work hard. Why would you do this to me?" Margaret's eyes were hard. "Because I know you're kind. You pretend to be innocent until you've destroyed everything." Michael stepped forward, his voice shaking with rage. "No, the only one destroying this family right now is you." Emily pressed her hands to her face, weeping. Michael knelt beside her, placing the bracelet aside and speaking gently. "I believe you. I always will." For the first time, Emily let herself look directly into his eyes. What she saw there made her heart ache: fierce loyalty, determination, and something else she hardly dared name. But Margaret's voice sliced through the moment. "Michael, if you choose her side, you will regret it." Michael rose slowly, his hand still resting protectively on Emily's shoulder. "No, Mother. The only thing I regret is ever letting you treat her this way." And with those words, the balance in the Whitmore household shifted forever. The mansion no longer felt like a home. Its grand marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and towering ceilings echoed with unspoken battles. After the incident with the bracelet, something had cracked in the Whitmore family. The staff whispered nervously in the corridors, afraid to take sides. Michael carried a storm of anger within him, and Emily. Emily carried the weight of shame she did not deserve, though Michael had defended her. Though he had uncovered the truth of Margaret's lie, the damage lingered. Once suspicion is planted, it grows roots deep into people's minds. The other maids who had once laughed with Emily in the laundry room or shared secrets in the kitchen, now glanced at her warily. Even if they knew Margaret had staged the theft, none dared to speak it aloud. It was safer to keep their distance. Emily felt it every moment of the day. Silence clung to her like a shroud. Meals alone. Work alone. Eyes following her, but no words offered. She would lie awake at night, staring at the slanted ceiling of her attic room, tears slipping silently onto her pillow. Her grandmother's photo on the nightstand was the only comfort she had. "Stay strong," she whispered to herself. Stay strong for her. Michael, however, could not stay silent. His anger at his mother's cruelty burned hotter each day. He found himself seeking Emily whenever he could, trying to break through the wall of distance she now kept between them. One afternoon, he spotted her in the back garden, trimming roses with careful hands. The late autumn light caught in her hair, and for a moment he simply watched. She looked tired, so tired, but graceful in a way that made his chest ache. "Emily," he called softly. She startled, nearly dropping the shears. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quickly, bowing her head. He frowned. "Why do you always call me that? After everything?" "I think we're past Mr. Whitmore." Her cheeks flushed. "I don't mean disrespect, sir. But your mother." "My mother," Michael interrupted, his tone sharp, "does not decide how we speak to each other. You can call me Michael." Emily hesitated, her lips parting as though the name itself was forbidden. Finally, in a whisper so soft he almost didn't hear, she said, "Michael." The sound of it on her lips sent a shiver down his spine. He stepped closer. "That's better." But she quickly looked away, busying herself with the roses. "Please, Sir Michael, it's best if we don't. If we don't talk like this. Your mother already hates me. If she thinks there's more between us, she already thinks that," Michael said bluntly. Emily froze. She sees what she wants to see. And she never stop, Emily. Whether we talk or not, whether we even look at each other or not, she will always see you as a threat. Because she's blinded by her past. Emily's chest tightened. "Then maybe I should leave," the words stabbed him. "Leave?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "It would be easier for everyone. For the staff. For your mother. For you." Michael's voice dropped to a whisper. "Easier maybe. But not better. Not for me." Emily turned sharply, her hands trembling as she set down the shears. "Why? Why would it matter if I stayed or left? I'm just a maid." Michael stepped forward until there was barely space between them. His eyes locked onto hers, fierce and unyielding. "You are not just anything, Emily Carter. You're the only person in this house who sees me, not my money, not my name, not my inheritance. Just me." Her breath caught. She wanted to step back, to escape, but her feet would not move. The world seemed to narrow to his gaze, his words, his presence. "Michael," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, don't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because I can't afford to believe them." Before he could answer, a sharp voice cut through the garden air. "There you are." Margaret stood at the edge of the patio, her eyes cold, her lips pressed thin. "I should have known I'd find you hiding out here with her." Emily jumped back, her face pale. Michael straightened, his jaw tight. "Mother," he said. "Don't mother me," she snapped. "I've had enough of this charade. You will stop humiliating this family by chasing after a servant. Do you hear me? Stop this madness." Michael's fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't madness. What's madness is treating a kind, hard-working woman like she's less than human." Margaret's face turned crimson. "She is less than us. That's the truth, Michael. And if you can't see that, then you're blind." Emily's heart twisted painfully. She could bear the insults directed at herself, but hearing Michael attacked because of her, it was unbearable. She bowed quickly. "I should go." "No," Michael said sharply, catching her arm before she could flee. His touch was gentle, but his grip firm. "Stay," Margaret's eyes blazed. "Let her go, Michael. Unless you want me to throw her out myself." "Try it," Michael said, his voice like steel. For a moment, mother and son locked eyes, the tension crackling like fire between them. Finally, Margaret spun on her heel and stormed back into the house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Emily pulled her arm free, her chest heaving. "Michael, please. Don't make things worse. She'll destroy me." Michael's gaze softened, though his voice remained steady. "Then I'll protect you." Emily shook her head, tears spilling now. "You can't protect me from everything. She's powerful. She knows people. She can ruin me in ways you can't stop." Michael reached for her hand, holding it gently between his own. "Then let her try. Because for the first time in my life, Emily, I found something worth fighting for." Emily's breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe him, wanted it more than anything, but fear still gnawed at her. Before she could respond, a maid appeared at the doorway, her eyes wide. "Mrs. Whitmore is calling for everyone in the salon. She says it's urgent." Emily quickly pulled her hand back. "I should go." Michael's eyes darkened with determination. "We'll face whatever she's planning together." When they entered the salon, Margaret stood tall at the center, her pearls glinting, her face set in icy triumph. The staff gathered nervously around the edges of the room. Emily slipped into the crowd, trying to make herself small. But Margaret's voice rang out, sharp and merciless. "My friends will be arriving this evening for dinner," Margaret announced. "Important people. People of influence. And I will not have this household disgraced by incompetence. Every detail must be perfect." Her eyes slid toward Emily, narrowing. "And if anyone fails, they will be dismissed on the spot." The warning hung heavy in the air. Though the words were meant for everyone, every person in that room knew they were aimed squarely at Emily. Michael stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. "Threats won't keep this house running, Mother. Respect will." Margaret's lips curled. "And what would you know about running a house? You've spent your life gallivanting through Europe, chasing your whims. I built this home. I maintain it. And I will protect it from vipers who try to crawl their way in." Her gaze flicked toward Emily again, sharp as a blade. Michael's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "If you continue this, you will lose more than your staff, Mother. You'll lose me." A gasp rippled through the servants. Margaret's face went white, then red with fury. "You would choose her over your own family?" Michael didn't flinch. His eyes found Emily's across the room, and in that moment, the truth was clear in his voice. "Yes." Silence crashed down, heavy and unbreakable. Emily's heart thundered in her chest. She had never asked for this, never wanted to be the reason for a war within the Whitmore family. But now, standing in that gilded salon with every eye upon them, she realized there was no turning back. Whatever storm was coming, it would sweep them all into its path. And somewhere deep inside her heart, despite her fear, Emily whispered to herself, maybe some storms are worth facing. The Whitmore estate buzzed with preparation for the grand dinner Margaret had announced. It was not just any dinner, it was a gathering of senators, wealthy investors, and members of the old Connecticut elite. Margaret intended to use the evening to restore her dignity, to erase any whisper of scandal caused by the bracelet incident and her son's rebellious behavior. Emily worked tirelessly from morning to evening, polishing every surface, arranging flowers, setting tables with such precision that her hands shook. Margaret shadowed her at every turn, her voice sharp and cold. "No, not like that. The roses are uneven. Too much polish, you've left streaks. Do it again." Each order sliced into Emily's spirit. She obeyed without complaint, her jaw tight, her eyes lowered. Inside, however, she prayed desperately that nothing would go wrong. Margaret had made her intentions clear. One mistake, and Emily would be thrown out. As the sun set, the mansion transformed into a glittering stage. Crystal chandeliers blazed above the long dining table, every glass sparkling like captured stars. Silverware gleamed, napkins folded into flawless peaks. Outside, sleek black cars pulled up the circular driveway, and guests in tuxedos and silk gowns stepped onto the marble steps. Emily slipped quietly between the rooms, serving drinks, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. She kept her eyes down, her movements graceful, invisible. But no matter how she tried, she could feel Margaret's gaze following her, watching for the slightest stumble. Michael, dressed in a tailored black suit, entered the grand salon with a forced smile. He shook hands with senators, exchanged polite greetings with investors, and endured the flattery of women who eyed him as a prize catch. But his heart wasn't in it. His eyes kept straying to Emily, moving silently with a tray of wine glasses, her hair neatly tied back, her bandaged hands hidden under white gloves. She looked fragile under the weight of expectation, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. To Michael, she was the only real person in a room full of masks. When the guests were seated, Margaret made her entrance. She was radiant in an emerald gown, her pearls glistening, her voice dripping charm as she welcomed her guests. "Tonight," she declared, "the Whitmore family is honored to host such distinguished company. May this evening remind us all of tradition, integrity, and the values that keep our society strong." Applause followed. But Michael heard the edge in her words. the hidden message meant for him. Tradition, integrity, values, things she believed Emily threatened. Dinner was served. Emily moved swiftly, pouring wine, refilling water glasses. Everything was perfect. For a time, Margaret's smile relaxed. But then disaster. One of the guests, a senator's wife in a glittering gown, suddenly let out a sharp cry. Her silk dress was splattered with red wine. The entire table gasped, eyes darting to Emily, who stood frozen with the wine bottle in her hands. Margaret's face went pale, then flushed crimson. She rose instantly, her voice cutting the air. "Emily!" Emily's heart pounded. I didn't." She looked down, realizing the bottle had slipped in her trembling grip. Her hands shook violently. The senator's wife dabbed at her gown with a napkin, frowning in annoyance. Whispers rippled down the table. Margaret's eyes burned with triumph. "This is what happens when you trust incompetence," she hissed, her voice loud enough for all to hear. "You humiliate us in front of senators and governors. You disgrace this family." Emily's throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Then Michael rose. "Enough." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to him. "It was not her fault," Michael said firmly. "Her hands are injured. She should never have been forced to serve tonight." Margaret's eyes widened. "Michael, sit down." "No," he said, his voice steady. He turned to the senator's wife. "I apologize sincerely for the accident. Please allow me to replace your gown tomorrow with one of equal or greater value. But don't you dare place the blame on her." The guest shifted uncomfortably, surprised by his vehemence. Margaret's smile faltered. "She is a servant," Margaret said tightly, trying to salvage control. "She is a human being," Michael countered, his voice rising. "A human being you've bullied, humiliated, and tried to destroy. And I won't allow it anymore." A hush spread across the table. The senator's wife, flustered, waved her hand. "It's just a dress. No need for dramatics." But the damage was done. Margaret's face hardened into stone. "Michael, you're making a fool of yourself." In front of everyone, Michael stepped closer to Emily, his presence towering, protective. "No, I'm making a choice. Tonight, right now." The guests leaned forward, whispers buzzing like bees. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. Michael turned to his mother, his voice ringing clear. "You asked me once if I would choose her over this family. My answer is yes. 1,000 times yes." Gasps erupted around the table. Margaret staggered back, her hand clutching the pearls at her throat. "You would throw away everything? Our name, our legacy? For her?" Michael's gaze never wavered. "For her. For someone who shows more integrity and dignity than all the wealth in this room combined." Emily's knees felt weak, her breath coming in shuddering bursts. "Michael, please," she whispered, terrified of the consequences. But Michael took her trembling hand in his, holding it up for all to see. "I love her. And I won't hide it anymore." The room exploded in murmurs. Some guests looked scandalized, others intrigued. A few even smiled quietly. But Margaret stood frozen, her face ashen with fury and disbelief. "You will regret this," she said in a voice that trembled with venom. "You'll regret it for the rest of your life." Michael looked at her calmly. "No, Mother. The only regret I'd have is letting you destroy her." Emily's tears spilled freely, her heart torn between fear and joy. Never in her life had anyone defended her like this. And yet she knew Margaret was not defeated. Not yet. From the shadows of the salon, Margaret's eyes gleamed with a new, darker resolve. She would not lose. Not to a maid. Not to anyone. The battle lines had been drawn, and the real war was only beginning. The Whitmore mansion had never been so silent. The grand dinner had ended hours earlier, but the echoes of what happened still clung to the air like a storm that refused to move on. Margaret sat alone in the library, her emerald gown crumpled around her, a glass of untouched wine trembling in her hand. Her face was pale, her eyes red from fury, but there was a glimmer of something deeper: fear. She had spent her life building a fortress of reputation, wealth, and power. Now in one single evening, her son had defied her publicly, declared his loyalty to a maid, and humiliated her in front of senators and investors. The shame burned worse than fire. Margaret slammed the wine glass down on the mahogany desk, shattering it into pieces. "No," she hissed to herself. "I will not let this girl take everything from me. Not my son. Not my name. Not my empire." Meanwhile, in the modest attic room where she slept, Emily sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her heart still racing. She replayed the dinner scene over and over, hearing Michael's voice in her mind: "I love her. And I won't hide it anymore." No one had ever said such words to her, especially not someone like him, a man who had everything the world could offer. Her heart swelled with warmth, yet fear gnawed at the edges. "What have you done, Michael?" she whispered into the dark. "You've put yourself against your own family, against your own mother, for me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. She thought of her grandmother, fragile and ill, depending on her wages to afford medicine. What if Margaret threw her out tomorrow? What if the threats became real? What if her grandmother suffered because of her? Emily pressed her palms together in prayer. "God, give me strength. Show me the path. Don't let me cause harm to the only person who truly cares for me." Down the hall, Michael paced his bedroom like a caged lion. His tie hung loose around his neck, his jacket tossed carelessly on the chair. He couldn't sleep, not after what had happened. For years, he had played the role expected of him: the polished son, the heir, the businessman. He had attended galas, met with investors, entertained shallow conversations with women who smiled too wide. But never once had he felt alive. Until Emily. Her quiet resilience, her dignity in the face of cruelty, her strength despite hardship, it shook him to his core. She was real. And for the first time, he wanted something real. He stopped by the window, staring out at the moonlit gardens where Emily often worked. "I won't let her suffer anymore," he muttered. "Not because of me. Not because of my mother." Margaret, however, was not done. By dawn, she was already at work, seated at her desk with her phone in hand. She called Regina Sullivan, her oldest friend and ally in the social elite. "Regina, it's Margaret. We need to meet today. It's urgent." Regina, a sharp-tongued woman with influence in every club and committee, arrived by mid-morning. She listened as Margaret recounted the dinner scandal, her face tightening with disbelief. "Michael actually said that? In front of everyone?" "He humiliated me, Regina," Margaret said bitterly. "He humiliated our family. And it's because of that girl." Regina tapped her manicured nails on the armrest of the leather chair. "If this becomes gossip, the Whitmore name will be dragged through the mud." "It already has," Margaret snapped. "Unless we stop it now. And what exactly are you planning?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. "She needs to be removed, permanently." Regina hesitated. "You mean fire her?" "Fire her, blacklist her, make sure no one in this state hires her again. I'll ruin her reputation so thoroughly she'll have no choice but to leave town. And when she's gone, Michael will have no one left to define me for." Regina raised an eyebrow. "That's dangerous, Margaret. Michael isn't a boy anymore. He might fight back. Then let him," Margaret spat. "He'll learn soon enough that family and power always win." That afternoon, Emily was summoned to the main hall. Her heart pounded as she descended the grand staircase. Margaret stood waiting, a cold smile plastered across her face. "Emily," Margaret began sweetly, too sweetly, "I've been reviewing your work here. And I've decided this household no longer requires your services." Emily froze. "You're dismissing me?" Margaret tilted her head. "Consider it an act of mercy." A girl like you doesn't belong in a place like this. Perhaps you'd be happier cleaning smaller homes. But you won't find work easily. I'll make sure of that." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Mrs. Whitmore, please, I need this job." "My grandmother," Margaret cut her off. "Your grandmother is not my concern. Pack your things. You leave by tonight." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she refused to beg. With trembling dignity, she nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Just then, Michael appeared in the doorway, his expression hard. "No, she's not leaving." Margaret's mask of politeness cracked. "Michael, stay out of this." "She's not your servant to destroy," Michael said, his voice steady but sharp. "She's a human being with more honor than you've shown in years." "And if she leaves, I leave too," Margaret gasped. "You wouldn't dare." "I would," Michael said without hesitation. "I'll walk out of this house and never return." For a moment, mother and son locked eyes, the air thick with defiance. Then Emily spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Michael, don't do this for me. I can't be the reason you turn your back on your family." Michael turned to her, his chest tight. "Emily, you don't understand. I already made my choice the moment I saw you suffering in this house. You are worth more than every dollar, every name, every lie in these walls." Margaret's face drained of color. She had lost control, truly lost it. "Michael," she whispered, her voice shaking. "If you walk away, you're no longer my son." Michael took Emily's hand. Then so be it. That night, for the first time in his life, Michael left the Whitmore mansion with nothing but a suitcase in one hand and Emily's trembling fingers in the other. They walked into the cool night air, leaving behind chandeliers and marble floors for the uncertain road ahead. Emily's heart was torn, grief for what Michael had sacrificed, awe for his courage, and fear for what lay ahead. "Are you sure?" she asked softly as they reached the edge of the estate. Michael stopped, turned to her, and cupped her face gently. "Emily, for the first time in my life, I'm absolutely sure. I don't want wealth. I don't want reputation. I want you. Only you." And in that moment, under the starlit sky, Emily realized the truth. Love, pure and unyielding, had given them the courage to defy the world. Whatever battles awaited, whatever pain Margaret still had in store, they would face it together. For love was stronger than wealth, stronger than power, stronger than fear. And though their journey had only begun, one thing was certain. Emily Carter, the maid once despised, and Michael Whitmore, the heir who defied it all, were bound by a love that would not break. Not tonight. Not ever.